In the heart of the Serengeti, a dying lion lay trapped in a poacher's pit, his body broken, his spirit fading. But when Dr. Ryan Cooper climbed down into that pit, he had no idea he was about to change both their lives forever. What began as a desperate
Easy now,
rescue
little
turned
one.
into an unthinkable bond between man and beast, a connection so deep it defied nature itself. And when that same lion returned to the wild, what he did next left the entire world speechless. Stay until the end. This is one story you'll never forget. The first sound Dr. Ryan Cooper heard wasn't a roar. It was something worse. A hollow, rasping breath, the sound
It's
of
all right,
life
Baraka.
collapsing under its own weight. He froze one boot buried in the parched red dust of Tanzania's Serengeti, the morning sun bleeding over the horizon like fire. For 12 years, Ryan had worked among dying animals, seen what poachers left behind. But nothing prepared him for what he was about to find. The radio call had come just before dawn, strange noises near Olduvai Gorge, possible injured wildlife signs of poacher traps. By the time Ryan and the ranger team reached the coordinates, the world was silent again. No vultures circling, no movement in the grass, just the faint smell of rot drifting on the wind. Over here, one of the rangers called, pointing to what looked like a patch of ordinary brush. But as Ryan approached, he saw it branches too evenly, arranged the faint outline of a wooden hatch buried beneath dust. His pulse quickened. He knelt, brushing away debris until the reality hit him. This wasn't a random hole. It was a prison, a trap designed for something massive. When the team lifted the crude cover, the stench hit them, metal feces, blood, and decay. 10 feet below, lying motionless against the dirt wall, was a full-grown male lion. For a long moment, nobody spoke. The lion's ribs jutted out like the bones of a shipwreck, his once golden mane reduced to filth and mud. His body was barely more than a skeleton, his eyes dull, yet still unbearably human in their awareness. He had been here for weeks, alive but not living. "Dear God," one ranger whispered. "He's still breathing." Ryan dropped to his knees, adrenaline cutting through his shock. "Get the kit," he ordered. His voice trembled, but his hands moved with practiced urgency. The others hesitated. It was madness to go near an apex predator, even a dying one. But Ryan was already securing a rope to a nearby tree. "We can't wait for backup," he said. "Every minute counts." As he lowered himself into the pit, the air thickened with the smell of suffering. The lion stirred weakly, one paw twitching in the dust. Ryan could see where the creature had clawed at the walls, desperate to escape, tearing his pads down to bone. He was covered in flies, open sores festering, where his skin had rubbed raw against the metal and wood. The sight was unbearable. This wasn't just a trapped animal. It was torture engineered for profit. "Easy boy," Ryan whispered, inching closer. "You're safe now." He reached for the tranquilizer syringe, calculating the smallest possible dose. The lion's eyes flicked toward him, not with rage, but recognition, a haunting awareness that made Ryan's throat tighten. He pressed the needle in, gently murmuring reassurance, until the lion's breathing steadied into a shallow rhythm. Only then did he allow himself to exhale. "Hydration first," he called up to the team. "I need IV fluid, saline, and glucose stat." The rope creaked as they lowered his medical bag. Sweat burned his eyes, but he ignored it, focusing on the fragile rhythm of life beneath his hands. "You're a fighter, aren't you?" he murmured, slipping the needle into a vein. "We'll call you Baraka," means blessing. The hours that followed blurred together, antibiotics, fluids, the slow battle against death, inching closer with every heartbeat. The temperature climbed the air, thick with the buzz of flies and fear. Twice the lion stopped breathing, and twice Ryan brought him back. Above, the rangers kept watch for poachers, their rifles trained on the horizon. Time seemed to stretch endlessly until at last Baraka's breathing deepened, his chest rising with effort, but rhythm nonetheless. As the rescue helicopter thundered into view, Ryan tied the final bandage around one of the lion's legs. The rope harness strained as they began to lift Baraka from the pit, his massive frame swaying weightless at last. The sight hit Ryan harder than he expected. For a moment, he saw not a predator, but a victim of human greed, one who had suffered alone in darkness while the world above went on. When the helicopter door closed and the roar of the blades drowned out all else, Ryan leaned back, his blood-stained gloves trembling. He looked at the lion, his lion, and whispered into the rising wind, "You're not dying in a hole, Baraka. Not while I'm still breathing." He didn't know it yet, but this moment, this act of reckless compassion, would change everything. Because what the lion would do next would challenge every rule Ryan had ever believed about the wild, about instinct, and about the fragile, unstoppable force of trust. The drive to the Serengeti Animal Recovery Center felt endless. Ryan sat in the back of the modified transport truck, his hands pressed to the side of Baraka's massive rib cage, feeling for every fragile rise and fall. The lion's breathing was shallow, almost imperceptible under the roar of the engine. Each bump in the dirt road felt like a cruel reminder that the animal's body was breaking down faster than the medicine could work. A sheen of sweat covered Ryan's face despite the morning chill. He'd fought for animal lives before, but never one so far gone, never one that seemed to hover so close to death, yet refused to let go. By the time they reached the medical bay, Baraka's pulse was thread-like. The team moved with the urgency of soldiers under fire. Dr. Amara and Jerry, the sanctuary's director and one of Africa's leading big cat specialists, met Ryan at the entrance. Her expression hardened as she saw the lion's condition. "Get him to Bay 3, she ordered. Ivline ready saline drip at double flow, blood work vitals and full body scan. Her tone was crisp, professional, but Ryan could hear the tremor of disbelief beneath it. For the next 24 hours, time lost all meaning. The medical bay filled with the steady rhythm of beeping monitors, the hiss of oxygen, and the low murmur of voices giving orders no one dared question. Baraka's body was failing one system at a time: dehydration, starvation, kidney strain, infection. His fur, once the color of sunrise, had faded to a dull tan. Every rib stood in stark relief under the dim surgical lights. At one point, when his heartbeat slowed, almost to nothing, Amara turned toward Ryan and whispered, "We might be too late." But Ryan wasn't listening. He was focused on the smallest flicker of movement, the twitch of a paw, the faint flecks of muscle under paper-thin skin. "No," he muttered almost to himself. "Not yet." He adjusted the oxygen mask, added another line for fluids, and began to speak softly, not to the staff, but to the lion. "You've made it through hell, Baraka. Don't stop now. You've got more fight left in you." By midnight, exhaustion began to take hold of the team. One by one, assistants rotated out to rest, but Ryan stayed. He refused to leave the observation room, his eyes fixed on the flickering monitor displaying Baraka's vitals. Every dip in the heart rate felt like a knife to the chest. Every small rise a spark of hope. He couldn't explain the connection, but he felt it's something unspoken that went beyond species or science. This wasn't just survival, it was redemption. In the early hours of the third day, Baraka's breathing deepened. The blood transfusion had taken hold, the fluids replenished his strength, and his eyes began to show faint recognition. When Ryan approached the cage, Baraka lifted his head weakly, amber eyes locking onto the man who had pulled him from darkness. For several seconds, neither moved. It wasn't fear or dominance or instinct, it was understanding. The moment cracked something open inside Ryan, something that had long been buried under years of scientific detachment. He spent the following week almost entirely at Baraka's side, working in shifts with Amara and the veterinary staff. Every meal was measured by hand, first liquid nutrition, through a feeding tube, then small portions of minced meat. Every injection, every antibiotic dosage was calculated down to the milligram. The fear of losing him never faded. Twice, Baraka went into respiratory distress, forcing Ryan to administer manual CPR through the thick mane, praying with every compression. "Come on, Baraka," he whispered, his voice breaking. "You're stronger than this." Both times the lion came back. Other veterinarians began whispering among themselves. Ryan had crossed the line too much time, too much emotion invested in one animal. He had started talking to Baraka during treatment, reading aloud from old journals, even humming to steady his own nerves during the late-night hours when no one else was awake. Amara confronted him one evening, leaning against the observation window. "You know this isn't sustainable," she said gently. "You're exhausting yourself. You can't save every animal that comes through those doors." Ryan looked up from his notes, eyes hollow but defiant. "I know that," he said quietly. "But this one, he's different. He didn't give up when everything told him to. I can't either." She studied him for a moment before sighing. "Then don't make it about guilt, Ryan. Make it about purpose." The turning point came on the 10th day. Ryan entered the enclosure with a bowl of food, his first attempt at direct feeding. Every instinct told him to stay behind the reinforced bars, but something deeper urged him forward. Baraka was awake, his head resting on his forepaws, his breathing slow but steady. "Hey, old boy," Ryan said softly, setting the bowl on the floor. "You ready for real food?" He reached for a piece of meat, holding it out with trembling fingers. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with effort that seemed monumental, Baraka lifted his head. His nostrils flared as he caught the scent. Slowly, he opened his jaws and extended his tongue, brushing it against Ryan's hand as he took the food. The contact was brief but electric. The room went silent. One of the assistants gasped. Ryan stayed perfectly still, the weight of the moment pressing into him like gravity. "He's eating," Amara whispered from behind the safety glass. "He's really eating." That night, Ryan didn't sleep. He sat beside the enclosure, writing in his field notebook, while Baraka dozed under the dim lights. Outside, thunder rolled across the plains, the kind of storm that could shake the windows and the soul alike. "You made it through the worst of it," Ryan said softly. "Now we fight for the rest." He didn't know that beyond the sanctuary fence, danger was already stirring, that Baraka's survival would ignite a chain of events reaching far beyond medicine. But for now, as lightning illuminated the lion's scarred form, Ryan felt something he hadn't in a long time: hope. The kind born not from logic, but from sheer, unrelenting faith that life, no matter how broken, still wanted to live. It began in silence, not the heavy, hopeless silence of the pit, but something fragile, cautious, and alive. Weeks after the rescue, the medical alarms no longer dominated the room. The steady rhythm of Baraka's breathing replaced them deep, and even a quiet triumph that everyone in the sanctuary felt, but no one dared to speak of aloud. Dr. Ryan Cooper had stopped counting the days since he first found the lion. His world had narrowed to a single routine: monitor, feed, observe, repeat. Yet within that repetition, something unexpected began to take root, a connection that words could never explain. Every morning before the staff arrived, Ryan would sit near the enclosure with a notebook and a cup of strong coffee that usually went cold before he finished half of it. Baraka would lift his head when he heard the sound of boots on the concrete. There was no roar, no aggression, only the faint flick of an ear, a slow blink of recognition. It was subtle, but for Ryan, it meant everything. For a creature that had once known only fear, trust was the rarest form of recovery. The sanctuary's team documented the progress meticulously. Baraka's appetite improved, his muscle tone returning, the infection sites healing. But there was something they couldn't quantify: the behavioral anomaly that defied all logic. The lion responded only to Ryan. When other caretakers entered, Baraka stayed still, his body tensed as if waiting for danger. When Ryan appeared, the tension melted away. He would even roll slightly to one side, exposing his flank, the most vulnerable gesture in any predator's vocabulary. Dr. Amaran Jerry watched these interactions from the observation deck with growing fascination and concern. "He's imprinting on you," she told Ryan one afternoon as they reviewed video footage. "That kind of dependency could make long-term rehabilitation impossible." Ryan nodded but didn't look away from the screen where Baraka was resting, his head lifted toward the camera, as if searching for him. "Maybe," he said quietly, "but if he didn't trust anyone, he'd still be dying. I'll take dependency over despair." The new feeding protocol began under Amara's reluctant approval. Ryan entered the enclosure for short intervals each day, speaking softly as he worked. The first few times, Baraka simply watched. Then one morning, as Ryan replaced the water bowl, the lion rose shakily to his feet and approached. The sound of his movement, the soft, deliberate thud of paws, sent a rush of adrenaline through Ryan's veins. Every instinct screamed at him to back away, to follow the rules, but he held his ground. The lion stopped just a few feet away, studying him. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then Baraka lowered his massive head, brushed his muzzle gently against Ryan's sleeve, and exhaled a long, rumbling breath that vibrated through the floor. It wasn't aggression. It was, acknowledgement. Ryan froze, overwhelmed by the weight of that silent gesture. Later, he would describe it as the moment the barrier between man and beast dissolved, not through dominance, but through mutual recognition. Over the next weeks, that fragile bridge grew stronger. Ryan began reading aloud while sitting by the enclosure, passages from field journals, conservation articles, even novels he found lying around the sanctuary's library. He wasn't sure why he did it, perhaps to fill the silence with something familiar. But Baraka seemed to respond, his eyes half closing, the great muscles of his shoulders loosening. One afternoon, Ryan absent-mindedly hummed while cleaning a feeding tray, and the lion let out a low rolling sound, a deep vibration that resonated through the enclosure. It was a sound Ryan had never heard before from a wild lion. Not a growl, not a purr, something between the two, like an echo of gratitude buried in instinct. The other staff called it the hum. Whenever Ryan entered, Baraka made that same sound quiet but deliberate. It became their unspoken language, a reassurance that both were safe. Word spread through the sanctuary, attracting quiet awe from even the most seasoned rangers. "I've seen lions tamed in captivity," one said, "but I've never seen one choose to trust." But trust came with consequences. Each day, Baraka grew stronger, and with strength came unpredictability. His instincts flickered at times like distant lightning. A loud noise or sudden movement could trigger an alert posture, a reminder that beneath the surface of calm lived the wild. Ryan adjusted, learning to move with intention, to respect every boundary the lion set. "You don't control trust," he told Amara during a late-night review session. "You earn it one heartbeat at a time." Still, doubt haunted him in quieter moments. Was he saving the lion or changing him? Could a predator that looked to a human for comfort ever be truly free again? He kept those questions to himself, bearing them under the steady rhythm of work, the medication schedules, the feeding logs, the recovery notes. Then one evening near dusk, the sanctuary lost power. The generators failed mid-storm, plunging the medical ward into darkness. The staff scrambled to secure the enclosures, but Ryan's first thought was of Baraka. Grabbing a flashlight, he ran across the compound through sheets of rain. Lightning cracked across the sky as he reached the lion's enclosure. Inside, Baraka paced restlessly, disturbed by the storm's ferocity. His low growls rolled through the air like distant thunder. Ryan approached the fence, his flashlight beam catching the golden glint of those familiar eyes. "It's okay, Baraka," he said softly, voice barely audible over the wind. "You're safe. I'm here." The lion stopped pacing, muscles still tense, nostrils flaring as he recognized the voice. Slowly, the growling subsided, replaced by the faint hum that had become their wordless bond. Ryan lowered himself to the ground, sitting in the mud outside the enclosure, until the storm passed. For hours, man and lion waited out the darkness together, separated by metal, united by trust. When morning came, the storm had stripped the savannah clean. The first light broke through the clouds, painting Baraka's coat gold once more. Ryan rose stiffly from the ground, his clothes soaked through, but his heart steady. The bond between them had survived the night, and something deeper had taken root. He didn't know it yet, but this connection would soon be tested in ways neither science nor instinct could predict when the world outside the sanctuary discovered the story of the lion who trusted a man. The months that followed were both triumphant and uneasy. Baraka was walking again, his once skeletal frame rebuilt with strength and grace, his golden coat catching the sunlight like fire over the savannah. Each morning, Ryan would watch him through the reinforced glass of the outer enclosure, marveling at the transformation. The lion who had been a breath away from death was now roaring again, a low, thunderous sound that rolled through the sanctuary like a storm returning to its season. Yet behind that awe was a growing question that haunted Ryan every time he heard it. What happens next? Baraka was too humanized for release, too attached to the presence of one man to survive in the wild. But he was also too alive, too powerful, too regal to spend the rest of his years in confinement. The sanctuary board convened repeatedly to debate his future. Dr. Amara and Jerry argued for a controlled rewilding process, suggesting the use of a transitional enclosure system at the edge of the Serengeti. "He deserves the sky," she said simply, "but he needs guidance to remember how to live beneath it." Ryan didn't disagree, but he carried the weight of doubt. He knew Baraka's instincts had dulled during recovery, shaped by months of human care and routine. A wrong step in the wild could mean death. Still, he couldn't ignore what he saw when he looked into the lion's eyes, the same fire, the same intelligence that had defied the poacher's pit and clawed its way back to life. That fire didn't belong behind a fence. Preparations for the rewilding began at dawn on a cloudless morning. The air was sharp with the scent of dry grass and diesel from the transport truck. Ryan supervised every detail, from the sedation dose to the placement of GPS tracking collars. Baraka moved with restless energy inside the transport crate, as if sensing the significance of what was coming. "You know this isn't goodbye," Ryan murmured as he checked the locks one last time. "It's just another beginning." The journey to the rewilding site took nearly 3 hours, cutting through stretches of acacia forest and golden plains that shimmered in the heat. When they arrived, the team worked in silence, setting up perimeter barriers and monitoring equipment. The enclosure itself was vast, over 500 acres of open savanna, bordered by natural ridges and observation outposts. It wasn't freedom, not yet, but it was the closest a sanctuary could come. As the sedation wore off, Baraka stirred. His first roar shattered the stillness, echoing across the land like a declaration. The team watched in silence as he rose unsteadily, his muscles flexing beneath the sheen of his restored strength. Ryan stood a few feet from the safety barrier, unable to look away. "He remembers," Amara said softly. "He knows this place is his." In the days that followed, Ryan monitored Baraka's adaptation through remote cameras and field observations. The lion explored the perimeter with cautious curiosity, reacquainting himself with wind and grass, with the movement of herds beyond the fence line. He began marking territory, scratching trees, and resting beneath the shade of baobabs, behaviors that spoke of instincts reawakening. Yet each time Ryan approached for routine checks, Baraka would emerge from the tall grass, drawn by the familiar sound of his voice. He no longer pressed his head against the glass or sought food from human hands, but he watched, always watched with that same calm awareness that had defined their bond from the beginning. The world beyond the sanctuary had started to take notice. News of Baraka's recovery spread through conservation circles, carried by viral footage of his first steps back into sunlight. Reporters called him the miracle lion, while environmental organizations hailed the case as a symbol of coexistence and compassion. But the attention also carried danger. Rumors began circulating that the poaching network responsible for his capture had resurfaced, furious at the disruption their exposure had caused. Security around the rewilding site was quietly increased, guards patrolling in shifts through the night. One evening just after dusk, the radio crackled in Ryan's tent. A ranger's tense voice broke through the static movement near the southern boundary. Could be animals, but might be people. Ryan grabbed his jacket and sprinted toward the observation ridge. From the high vantage point, he could see faint lights flickering near the outer fence, flashlights moving in deliberate formation. His pulse spiked. "Poachers," he said under his breath. Before he could issue orders, a sound cut through the wind, Baraka's roar. It was deeper, angrier than Ryan had ever heard a sound that belonged to the primal world. Through the night vision scope, he saw the massive silhouette racing toward the disturbance mane, flaring like a storm cloud. The lights scattered. Shouts echoed briefly, then vanished into the darkness. The rangers moved in minutes later, finding only abandoned snares and footprints leading away into the scrub. When Ryan approached the enclosure fence, Baraka was there, pacing near the boundary, his breathing heavy but steady. Their eyes met across the wire, one man and one lion, bound by something that defied the logic of either species. "You protected them," Ryan said softly. "You remembered who you are." Over the next weeks, Baraka's behavior changed subtly. He grew more independent, spending longer hours patrolling his territory, hunting small prey released into the enclosure for training. The GPS data showed expanding patterns of movement, fewer visits near the observation points. The wild was calling him back. Then came the day Ryan had both dreaded and prayed for. The sanctuary board approved the final phase, full release, into the protected wilderness corridor, linking the enclosure to the central Serengeti Reserve. The barrier gate would open once, remotely giving Baraka the freedom to choose to leave or to stay. Ryan stood at the control station, his hand hovering over the switch. The world around him was silent, except for the wind moving through the grass. "Whatever you choose," he whispered, "you've already won." The gate opened with a metallic groan. Baraka stood on the ridge, his mane rippling in the breeze, the plains stretching endlessly before him. For a long moment he looked back, not at the land, but at the figure standing by the fence. Then he turned and walked into the wild, his golden form merging with the horizon. Ryan didn't move for a long time. When the roar came hours later, distant but unmistakable, it rolled through the valley like thunder. It wasn't a roar of captivity or pain. It was freedom's voice, fierce, proud, and alive. And though the lion was gone, the sound stayed in Ryan's chest, an echo that would follow him for the rest of his life. A full year had passed since Baraka's release, yet his presence still lingered in the air around the sanctuary like a living memory. The dry season had returned to the Serengeti, coating the horizon in gold and dust, and every roar that echoed across the plains made Ryan's heart skip, wondering if it was him. The GPS collar had transmitted steady data for months, marking wide, confident movements, territorial expansion, successful hunts, the rhythm of a lion who had reclaimed his place in the world. But one evening, as the sun dipped behind the acacias, the signal stopped. For hours, Ryan sat in the monitoring room, staring at the blank map, refusing to believe it was failure. Collars malfunctioned all the time, he told himself. The wild was unpredictable. Still, the silence clawed at him. At dawn, he packed his gear, loaded a Land Rover, and drove toward the last recorded coordinates, Sector 9, a remote stretch where the grass grew tall enough to hide even an elephant. He traveled alone, following tracks that blurred with time and wind, until he reached the ridge that overlooked a watering hole. The place was alive with motion, zebra, impala, wildebeest drinking at the edge. And there, emerging from the shadow of a distant acacia, came a lion larger, broader, the mane darker, now streaked with the dust of his kingdom. Baraka. His stride carried the easy authority of a ruler who no longer needed to prove himself. Ryan's breath caught as the lion approached the water. Every movement was deliberate, every glance measured. This wasn't the fragile creature from the pit. This was what he was always meant to be. Ryan stepped from the vehicle, careful not to startle the herds. He stayed near the ridge, binoculars trembling in his hands. The lion paused mid-drink, ears twitching, gaze lifting toward the familiar sound of boots crunching the dry earth. Their eyes met across the distance, years collapsing into that single heartbeat. For a long, impossible moment, neither moved. The wind carried the faint scent of dust and memory. Then Baraka let out a sound, not a full roar, but a deep, resonant chuff that rolled across the plains like recognition made flesh. It wasn't the challenge of a predator. It was acknowledgement. Ryan felt his chest tighten as emotion overtook him. He wanted to call out, to speak the words that had lived inside him for months. You made it. But he stayed silent. The bond they shared had never needed language. After several breaths, Baraka turned back to the water, lapping slowly, then lifted his head again toward the ridge. His amber eyes held Ryan's one last time before he turned and disappeared into the tall grass, the savanna swallowing him whole. For a while, Ryan stood rooted where he was feeling both the ache of loss and the quiet peace of completion. He understood then that true rescue was not about keeping it, was about returning what had been stolen. Baraka's roar still lingered in the air, echoing faintly against the cliffs, as if carried by the earth itself. It wasn't a farewell. It was a promise, I remember. When Ryan returned to the sanctuary, the staff greeted him with cautious smiles, unsure whether to ask. He's thriving, Ryan said simply, and that was all that needed to be said. Later that night, he sat by the open window of his quarters, writing the final entry in his field journal. The greatest success in conservation isn't measured by proximity, he wrote. It's measured by the distance we create, the distance that allows the wild to remain wild. Outside, the night came alive with sound, insects, the low rumble of thunder far to the south, and somewhere beyond the hills, a single roar that rose and fell like an ancient song. Ryan set down his pen and smiled. Baraka hadn't just survived. He had remembered what it meant to be free, and that was enough. In the end, Baraka's story was never just about one lion's survival. It was about what happens when courage meets compassion, when a single act of kindness dares to stand against cruelty, and in doing so changes everything. Dr. Ryan Cooper didn't simply save a lion from a pit. He challenged the very boundaries of what we believe separates human and wild. Through patience, trust, and a faith deeper than instinct, he proved that love, even in its quietest form, can cross the lines nature once drew between species. Baraka's roar became more than a sound. It became a symbol, a voice for every creature silenced by fear, for every wild heart that deserved a second chance. His story reminds us that saving a life isn't only about medicine or rescue, it's about empathy. It's about seeing beyond the scars, beyond the fear, and recognizing that every being, no matter how wild, carries within them the same will to live, to trust, to belong. For Ryan, the true victory wasn't in the rehabilitation reports or the international headlines. It was in that final moment on the savannah when Baraka turned back one last time, not to say goodbye, but to remember. That fleeting look between man and lion held a truth the world too often forgets. Compassion is not weakness, and coexistence is not impossible. Sometimes the most powerful connection in nature is not built through dominance, but through understanding. As we reflect on their journey, may Baraka's roar echo in all of us, a call to protect, to heal, and to care for the fragile harmony that keeps this planet alive. Because every time we choose compassion over indifference, we take one step closer to restoring that balance. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that empathy still has the power to transform even the most untamable corners of the world, don't let it end here. Subscribe to our channel, share these stories, and help us continue bringing you true animal stories that inspire hope, courage, and love across species. Your support gives us the strength to tell the next story and to keep every roar of life echoing where it belongs in the wild.